It was a crisp autumn morning in the quiet, affluent suburb of Fairford Heights. Not far from Washington, D.C., the streets were calm, lined with red and gold leaves, and most of the town was going about its regular routine. But in a matter of minutes, a routine traffic stop would ignite a national firestorm. General Marcus L. Grant, a highly decorated four-star general in the U.S. military, was in town to attend a closed-door national security summit at a nearby defense think tank. Dressed in civilian clothes and driving a sleek black SUV with military contractor plates from another state, he had just finished a brief breakfast meeting and was en route to the event venue at an intersection near the town's central plaza. Flashing red and blue lights lit up behind his vehicle. General Grant calmly pulled over. 4 white police officers, already tense and aggressive, emerged from their cruisers, hands on their holsters. License and registration, barked Officer Duggan, the senior of the group. His tone was sharp, accusatory, not routine. Grant complied without resistance, handing over his identification, including his military ID. But instead of acknowledging his credentials, the officers began to question the legitimacy of his documents. Officer Paxton suggested the general might be impersonating military personnel. The implication was offensive, but not unfamiliar. Grant, a tall, dignified man in his early 50s, had faced versions of this subtle racism before, even in uniform. He calmly repeated who he was and where he was going. Still, the officers ignored him. They claimed his vehicle matched the description of a stolen SUV, despite no such alert existing in the system. One officer ran the plates and seemed unsure how to interpret the military registration. Rather than seek clarification, the group escalated. Within moments, the situation turned physical. Officer Duggan ordered Grant out of the vehicle. He raised his hands and stepped out, continuing to ask why he was being detained. Paxton shoved him against the hood and forced his arms behind his back. General Grant didn't resist. He merely looked into the crowd now gathering, his eyes calm but disappointed. A few people began filming. "Stop resisting." One cop shouted needlessly. Click. The handcuffs snapped shut. The crowd murmured in disbelief. A young woman, clearly upset, could be heard on the video saying, "That's a damn general. He's a war hero." Another bystander, a veteran, stepped forward and shouted, "That's General Marcus Grant. You're making a huge mistake." The officers ignored them, placing the handcuffed general in the back of a cruiser. Inside, General Grant sat quietly, his jaw clenched. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He'd led troops through war zones and briefed presidents. But in that moment, to those officers, none of it mattered. He was just a black man in a nice car in the wrong zip code. What should have been a short drive to a defense summit had turned into an act of humiliation. The arrest of one of the country's highest-ranking military leaders would soon ripple far beyond Fairford Heights. But for now, the general sat behind bars and the officers had no idea what storm they had just triggered. Within hours of General Marcus L. Grant's wrongful arrest, the incident erupted far beyond the borders of Fairford Heights. The spark came from a 48-second cell phone video uploaded by a local college student who had witnessed the arrest and immediately sensed something was wrong. The clip showed a black man dignified, calm, and cooperative being forcibly handcuffed by white police officers, despite repeatedly identifying himself as a general in the U.S. military. The student's caption read, "They just arrested a black man claiming to be a general outside a defense conference. He showed ID. They didn't care. Hashtag Fairford Police, hashtag racial profiling." The video went viral in under an hour. By noon, it was circulating on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Millions watched the clip in disbelief. Veterans recognized General Grant immediately. Prominent journalists, military officers, and politicians began retweeting it, calling for accountability. The hashtag General Grant shot to the top of trending topics, along with hashtag handcuffed hero and hashtag racist cops. News outlets scrambled for details. By mid-afternoon, the story had been picked up by CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and NPR. Local authorities tried to downplay the situation, calling it a standard traffic stop under review, but that only fueled more outrage. Civil rights activists were quick to weigh in. Reverend Al Sharpton released a statement condemning the officer's actions, while attorney Ben Crump posted, "A decorated black general arrested, disrespected, and humiliated. If he isn't safe from racial profiling, who is?" At the White House briefing, reporters demanded a response. The press secretary stated that President Biden had been briefed and was deeply concerned. Meanwhile, in the Pentagon, top military officials were furious. General Grant wasn't just a high-ranking officer, he was a respected figure in national defense, known for his leadership in joint military operations and diplomatic efforts abroad. His arrest wasn't just disrespectful. It was politically explosive. Back in the Fairford police station, General Grant remained calm. He had refused special treatment even after one officer realized who he was. Instead, he sat quietly in the holding cell, requesting only a phone call to his legal team. He asked to be charged formally or released nothing more. He wasn't there to negotiate. He was making a point. Protests began forming outside the station by late afternoon. Some were local residents shocked by the incident, while others drove in from nearby cities to show support. Signs read, "Stop profiling our heroes. Justice for General Grant." No one is immune to racism. A growing number of veterans and active duty service members joined the protests in uniform, some saluting toward the jailhouse in a powerful show of solidarity. By evening, civil rights organizations announced they were preparing legal action. The NAACP and ACLU both promised to file formal complaints and demand a federal investigation. Political pressure mounted as the mayor of Fairford attempted to hold a press conference but was shouted down by angry citizens demanding immediate consequences. What had begun as a case of small-town policing had now become a national crisis. And while General Grant remained stoic behind bars, the country had already begun to rally behind him, not just because of his rank, but because his dignity in the face of injustice reminded Americans just how deep racial bias still runs, even at the highest levels of honor. As the media frenzy intensified and protests swelled outside the Fairford Heights Police Department, the legal system began to show its cracks. General Marcus L. Grant, despite his towering credentials and growing public support, found himself at the mercy of a local justice system, unequipped and unwilling to handle the gravity of what they had done. Inside the county jail, General Grant remained composed. He had been offered a quiet release by a nervous deputy once the backlash began online, but he refused to leave without formal legal process. "If this is how you treat me," he said calmly, "then we need it documented for every black man who doesn't wear 4 stars." His words were powerful. The staff didn't know how to respond. Meanwhile, the arrest report rushed and vague cited failure to comply with officer instructions and possible impersonation of a military officer. These flimsy accusations were enough for the judge on call, Judge Alan Brewster, to sign off on holding the general overnight. Brewster, a conservative local magistrate with a history of siding with law enforcement, viewed the arrest as procedurally sound and rejected early efforts by Grant's legal team to have him released immediately. Outside legal experts were stunned. Military lawyers, civil rights attorneys, and even retired judges commented on national broadcasts, calling the decision a gross miscarriage of justice. One prominent legal analyst remarked, "This isn't just about General Grant. It's about a system more interested in protecting its own than correcting its errors." While the judge stalled and the officers involved went silent, new details began to emerge. An internal leak from the DMV revealed there had been no report of a stolen vehicle matching Grant's SUV. The claim made during the stop had been baseless. Worse, body cam footage reportedly showed the general identifying himself calmly, multiple times, and being ignored. Public reaction to these leaks was swift. Civil rights organizations demanded the judge's recusal and the officer's immediate suspension. Members of Congress issued official statements. Representative Ayanna Pressley tweeted, "A decorated general handcuffed and humiliated for driving while black. The system's mask is off." Back in Washington, the story reached the Department of Defense. The Secretary of Defense, Elliott Raines, was in a security briefing when an aide whispered the news into his ear. Raines stopped the meeting. General Grant wasn't just a military asset. He was a close friend, a man Raines had served with in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was furious. Raines immediately contacted the military's Legal Affairs Division and demanded a full report. But he didn't stop there. Recognizing the political and moral weight of the situation, he placed a direct call to Judge Brewster's office, a move that was unusual but not unethical. It wasn't to threaten, but to remind the judge who Marcus Grant was, what he had sacrificed for the country, and what kind of national disgrace was being allowed to unfold in his courtroom. Judge Brewster, feeling the national heat and the pressure from the highest echelons of the government, reluctantly agreed to an emergency hearing the following morning. But his tone remained defensive, suggesting he still believed the officers had done no wrong. The system was trying to shield itself, but the walls were beginning to crack. And with the Secretary of Defense now involved, the arrest of General Grant was no longer a local issue. It had become a test of justice at the national level. As outrage over General Marcus L. Grant's arrest swept across the nation, momentum reached a boiling point in Washington, D.C. The Department of Defense, having remained quiet for the first 24 hours, could no longer sit on the sidelines. Secretary of Defense Elliott Raines, a seasoned and respected figure in both political and military circles, knew the moment demanded decisive intervention. Raines had watched the video multiple times. His jaw clenched each time he saw the man he once served beside in combat pushed against a vehicle and handcuffed like a criminal. Grant wasn't just a four-star general. He was a symbol of integrity, discipline, and leadership. More importantly, he was his friend. And what had been done to him was unacceptable. By mid-morning, Raines made a high-priority call not to the White House, not to the media, but directly to Judge Alan Brewster, the small-town judge who had authorized Grant's continued detainment. The call was direct, formal, and documented. "Judge Brewster," Raines began, his voice firm but measured, "I'm calling not to interfere, but to inform you of the consequences of your decision." Brewster, a man not used to receiving calls from cabinet-level officials, bristled defensively. "Mr. Secretary, I followed legal procedure. The officers acted on what they believed was a valid suspicion. The court can't bend to political pressure." Raines replied without hesitation, "This isn't political pressure. This is about correcting a grave and visible injustice. General Grant is not a suspect, he is a national hero. His identification was clear. Your officers ignored protocol, and now the integrity of your court is under national scrutiny." The judge attempted to deflect, claiming the matter was being reviewed, but Raines didn't let up. He reminded Brewster that both the Department of Justice and the Inspector General of the Army had opened independent investigations. The case had grown far beyond local jurisdiction. "This is not just about one man in handcuffs," Raines said. "This is about a pattern. and your name is about to be printed in headlines across the country. I suggest you weigh your next actions very carefully. Feeling the pressure, Brewster conceded to hold an emergency bail hearing that afternoon. It was a strategic retreat. He wanted the situation to calm down and quietly release the general under conditions that appeared procedural, rather than punitive. But the damage had already been done. Behind the scenes, the governor of the state called for an internal review of the Fairford Police Department. The Department of Justice, now fully engaged, began pulling body cam footage, dispatch logs, and personnel records. Meanwhile, Grant's legal team filed motions for immediate dismissal of all charges and began preparing civil litigation. The secretary's call, while not an official order, had sent a loud and unmistakable signal. The U.S. government was watching. And so was the country. Outside the courthouse, hundreds gathered holding signs and flags. Some wore their military uniforms. Others held portraits of General Grant from his tours overseas. The crowd was silent but powerful, a living indictment of what had happened. General Grant, still in custody but unwavering, prepared to face the judge once more. But this time, he wouldn't just walk into a courtroom. He would walk into a reckoning. And thanks to that single strategic phone call, justice was no longer optional, it was inevitable. By the time General Marcus L. Grant entered the courthouse for his emergency bail hearing, the quiet town of Fairford Heights had become the epicenter of a national civil rights crisis. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of nearly 2,000 people stood. In solidarity, veterans in uniform, civil rights leaders, students, local residents, and national media. Many held signs with messages like, "We salute you, General Grant," and "Racism is treason." The mood was electric, tense, but peaceful. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Members of General Grant's legal team, representatives from the Department of Defense, and attorneys from national civil rights organizations were in attendance. Judge Alan Brewster, now under immense pressure and national scrutiny, presided with a forced calm. His tone was more cautious than the day before, but not without defiance. As the hearing began, Grant's lead attorney laid out the facts: no active warrant, no legitimate traffic violation, a fully verifiable military ID presented at the scene, body cam footage showing Grant's complete cooperation, and perhaps most damning, no evidence of any stolen vehicle matching Grant's SUV. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as a military legal representative added a final point. General Grant has led forces on 3 continents. He has briefed 2 presidents. And last night he slept on a jail cot because of the color of his skin. Judge Brewster had little room to maneuver. Facing intense political and public pressure and a clear legal overreach, he granted immediate release and dismissed the impersonation claim pending further review. A weak attempt to save face. Grant, stoic as ever, walked out of the courthouse a free man, greeted by roaring applause from the crowd outside. Instead of heading straight home, General Grant stepped onto the courthouse steps and delivered a brief but powerful statement. With cameras and microphones swarming, he spoke not with anger, but clarity. "Yesterday, I was handcuffed. Not because I posed a threat, but because I didn't look like who they thought should be driving a nice car, or wearing the stars of a general. I am not the first, and I won't be the last. But I will not let this moment pass without meaning. Not for me. For the many who are never believed, never released, never heard." The crowd erupted. Later that evening, the Fairford Police Department held a hastily organized press conference. The police chief, visibly shaken, announced that the 4 officers involved had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. He offered a carefully worded apology for any procedural failures, but stopped short of admitting wrongdoing. That half apology sparked more anger. Protesters continued to march, and calls grew louder for the officer's termination and the judge's resignation. Civil rights groups, now representing Grant pro bono, announced a multi-pronged legal strategy: a civil rights lawsuit, federal complaints, and demands for state and federal policy reform. Veterans groups across the country rallied to Grant's defense. An open letter signed by over 3,000 active and retired military officers condemned the arrest as an affront to justice, honor, and everything the uniform stands for. What began as a traffic stop had transformed into a reckoning, not just for a small-town police department, but for a nation still grappling with the deadly consequences of bias. General Grant had not only survived the arrest, he was leading a movement. The fallout from General Marcus L. Grant's wrongful arrest reverberated across the nation for weeks and then months. What had begun as a small-town racial profiling incident escalated into a landmark moment in the national dialogue on policing, race, and justice. Now, the country wanted answers. And more than that, it demanded change. Immediately following Grant's release and public statement, major news outlets continued to cover the story around the clock. The body cam footage was leaked to the press and confirmed everything his team had claimed: calm demeanor, full compliance, and absolute clarity in identifying himself. No threats, no resistance. Just a decorated black general being treated like a criminal by officers who refused to see beyond their prejudice. The Department of Justice launched a formal civil rights investigation into the Fairfield Heights Police Department. A federal task force was assigned to review all prior arrests by the 4 officers involved. Patterns of racial bias quickly emerged. Their careers, once protected by departmental silence, were now under the nation's microscope. One officer resigned immediately. Another, facing mounting internal and legal pressure, issued a tearful public apology on national television. It was not well received. Many saw it as damage control. The remaining 2 were eventually charged with misconduct, civil rights violations, and falsifying a police report. They would face trial in federal court. Meanwhile, Judge Alan Brewster, whose reluctance to release Grant ignited further outrage, was referred to the state's Judicial Ethics Commission. Under pressure from both the public and the legal community, he announced his early retirement, citing stress, but his exit was seen as a forced resignation. In Congress, momentum built for legislative action. Several lawmakers introduced the General Grant Civil Rights Enforcement Act aimed at strengthening federal oversight of police departments and increasing penalties for violations of civil liberties by law enforcement. The bill gained bipartisan support, especially from veterans in both chambers who viewed the treatment of Grant as a personal insult to the uniform. At the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Elliott Raines made an unannounced appearance at a military leadership summit. Standing beside General Grant, he delivered a powerful speech. When one of our own is stripped of dignity not by an enemy, but by the very institutions meant to protect us, we are called not just to outrage, but to action. The president later honored Grant at the White House in a nationally televised ceremony, calling him a reminder of both how far we've come and how far we still have to go. But perhaps the most powerful chapter came from General Grant himself. He turned down lucrative book deals, television interviews, and even offers to run for office. Instead, he accepted a role leading a newly formed national task force on police accountability and military-civilian relations, composed of veterans, legal scholars, law enforcement reformists, and civil rights advocates. He traveled the country meeting with police departments, training cadets, and listening to victims of police abuse. He wasn't angry. He was focused. At one community event, a young black boy asked him, "Were you scared when they arrested you?" Grant knelt beside him and answered, "No, I wasn't scared, because I knew I wasn't alone, And now neither are you. The arrest that should never have happened had become a national turning point. And through quiet leadership and unwavering integrity, General Grant turned injustice into impact, proving once again that real strength is not in the stars on your shoulders, but in how you carry them.